we get experimental. SciAnts. We're curious, non-judgmental.
The United States might be without pandas. There was a recall, there's a panda recall, and it's not for safety. The loans are not being renewed. So for those of you who don't know, China owns all pandas. And this is just part of their conservation plan. My understanding is all of the other pandas have slowly been shipped on back. So my understanding is Atlanta is the only remaining place that has pandas. Yeah, China owns all of the pandas, and it's in part to control the conservation efforts. And so even though we have pandas at the National Zoo and whatnot, when we have a successful breeding program or whatever, and we have a new panda, at the appropriate time, that panda goes back to China. And when our loan period is up, usually what China does, because they have panda diplomacy, right? Spread goodwill by sharing the pandas. Usually China will just renew the loan period, and that's what's been happening for decades. And it ain't happening this time. It is not happening this time. So I thought we would talk about pandas and talk about the good and the bad of their conservation status right now.
They're not going extinct, Harissa. Don't worry. Necessarily.
Well, they were in dire straits. They were in very dire straits. They were listed as endangered in the 1980s. It was not looking good. There were 1,000 of them in the wild and a couple hundred of them in captivity. And nobody knew how they bred. It was a right mess. And things have been improving for the panda. Actually, China no longer classifies them as endangered. They're now vulnerable according to China. And that's a big deal because actually the IUCN previously had listed them, taken them off of endangered, and put them as vulnerable. And China was like, no, you guys, you don't know what's up. We know the pandas. They're still endangered. Anyway, so it was just a year or two ago that they finally removed them from the endangered list, and they were vulnerable. So that does not mean that they're not sensitive. Let's talk about the difference here. Okay, vulnerable. There's only 1,900 of them out in the wild. That is not 19,000. That is 1,900-ish wild pandas. And there's 600 something in captivity in the entire world. And we're like, okay, everyone can breathe easy now. I mean, that's not a lot of pandas. That is not a lot of pandas, y'all. I mean, okay, is that an epic cuddle pile of pandas? Yes. But for species conservation, I gotta say, that's not a comforting number of pandas to me. You know, we need more pandas, right? Okay, so this is the Smithsonian's National Zoo YouTube page, and they compilated a best of for each of their pandas. So this is Xiaoqi Ji. This is their most recent and last baby panda. And actually this was amazing because the mother she was 20 or just past 20. So they thought she was past her mating age. And then right in the last minute, she had this little guy. So this is the best of. Freaking adorbs, right? So he and his parents have been shipped back to China. The folks at the Smithsonian National Zoo are staying strong and saying that they are very optimistic that when the time is appropriate, China will, of course, just send us some new pandas. Hope they're right. We shall see. Okay, so amazing things are happening with panda conservation. I thought we'd chat just a little bit about their biology, and then I can give you guys an update about their conservation wins and woes, as it were. If that's not clear, the whole panda fiasco, we did that 100%. How they do it in the wild is a little bit of a mystery, but the numbers in the wild seem to be growing, and you might think, well, Lita, they're growing. We have all of these pandas in captivity. Surely we're just releasing them into the wild, and that's why the numbers are growing. No. The two things seem to be unrelated. It seems to be reducing poaching and preserving habitat is kind of the thing that's doing it for the wild pandas, which is great because we, collectively, human beings have tried releasing pandas. Okay, over the years, 14 pandas have been released, and we think 9 of them kind of made it, but none of the ones that were bred in captivity were able to reproduce. So they weren't really able to contribute to the population. So it's a little mystifying. That side of things hasn't really been figured out. We have pretty effective panda breeding programs in captivity now. But it doesn't seem, as of right now, it doesn't seem like there's a good system in place to supplement the wild population with captive pandas. But, you know, the wild population seems to not only be stabilizing, but slowly increasing, which is great. So maybe we won't need to be releasing, you know, captive bred pandas, but it is nice as far as genetic diversity, etc., to at least have that in our back pocket, you know, have a nice genetically diverse population of pandas where if their habitat starts being threatened again, which it could be, in a shocking twist, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyway, that's the state of...
Danny also says pandas are apparently the most expensive animals to keep at the zoo, and that is before you factor in the $1 million per year rental fee from China.
Yes, although that $1 million a year does go to panda conservation. But I would argue pandas themselves are a big draw to zoos, so they do substantially increase viewership. And, you know, a lot of people complain about pandas. When I was looking this stuff up, there were so many videos throwing shade at the panda. Like, they don't even help the ecosystem. Should we be preserving the panda? First of all, I'm going to say yes, but that's just me. They're a charismatic species. Like, they inspire so many people to care about the environment. And, you know, the environment that the panda lives in, which would be protecting the rest of the ecosystem as well. But just in general, it's a very engaging animal. I mean, I think that it's easy for people to underestimate their value in that regard. At least to me. I know people who will travel across the country to go see the pandas when they were at the Smithsonian National Zoo because they just fell in love with them with the panda cam, and you'd root for them when they were pregnant and you'd see a little new panda born. And it was a great form of science communication and outreach, and I thought that was amazing. Yeah, you guys, China does not mess around. So they've increased the size of their park for national pandas. And so it now encompasses 70% of the remaining panda habitat. 70% is now protected. And they have a lot of wildlife rangers that are patrolling this area to make the pandas safe and make sure there's not human-wildlife conflict, which is really extraordinary. Now, all of that being said, you know, you're like, 70%? That's incredible. It is. Like, way to go, China. That 70% is less than 1% of its original habitat, right? So, like, let's keep it in perspective. But still, I mean, it's impressive. For those of you who don't know, the panda is a true bear. It is in the bear family, but it is its own genus because it's a super weirdo bear. For a long time, people did have an argument of if it was more closely related to the red panda. So their names, you know, the giant panda and the red panda, that was actually because some scientists were placing them as like closely related species. And one of the reasons was they have this weirdo thumb adaptation that helps them when they're eating bamboo. And it is actually in the bear family Ursidae. It's just in its own genus. So most of the carnivorous bears we think of are much more closely related, and then there's this weirdo panda hanging out way on the far side of the evolutionary tree when we're looking at bears.
Wonder if they ever used to eat a more varied diet. That's what the video was suggesting.
Yeah, I mean, so certainly they must have, right? The process of specialization like that is very slow. But also what's really cool, but the panda's diet is actually more varied than we like to give them credit for. We're like, 99% of their diet is bamboo. Like, not all bamboo is created equal. They apparently change the part of the plant that they eat as well as the different species of bamboo depending on the season. And that helps tweak their diet so that if you actually look at the molecular makeup of their diet, it actually looks, as far as like protein and carbohydrate content, it looks more similar to some carnivores than comparable herbivores.
And Danny said, in case you didn't know, the panda's thumb is originally a modified wrist bone that sticks out like an extra digit.
I did not know that. That's cool. And if you're relying on human assisted breeding, 12 hours. You have a 12-hour window. And on top of it, this is a fun fact I learned. The sedation they use to do the procedure of insemination, if the panda has not ovulated, it will block ovulation. So if you miss that window, that 12-hour window, if you mistime it, there's no, take 2 is next year, my friend. There's no, oh, let's give it another day. Sorry, lost your shot. That is amazing. It is incredible to me that places like the National Zoo and the breeding programs over in China have been as successful as they have been, given how fiddly this nonsense is.
And is it, you said, then those that are in captivity that are bred like this can't reproduce?
It's not that they're infertile. It's that they have not successfully mated, and it's not clear why.
Like in the wild, like
in
a
the
natural,
wild,
okay.
when they're re-released, and it's not clear why. Although I will say, a lot of the pandas, one of the reasons they have human-assisted breeding programs is because some of the pandas have trouble figuring it out. They can't really do it on their own, and I wonder if that's a degree of socialization, like it is a learning process and they're just not socialized the same way in captivity as they would be in the wild. And so I wonder if that is an issue that then's translating when you're releasing the pandas into the wild. It's not that they're biologically incapable, it's not like they are infertile, but for some reason they are not entering the gene pool. Also, I mean, they did only release, they've tried over the years, they've released 14 captive pandas into the wild, of which 9 survived. But none of the ones that were actually bred in captivity have been reported as successfully breeding in the wild.
Arissa was wondering, do you think that once the pandas get their habitat back, they'll go back to eating meat?
No. So this has been like a long-term process. This has been like millions of years the pandas have settled on this particular diet. And so
it'd be too much of a stress to bring them back.
It would, like, their behavior, like they don't really have the hunting behavior would be one issue. But also just their jaw structure and their teeth structure is no longer designed to eat meat. So my guess is no. But getting back their habitat is key to them continuing to survive, for sure. And making sure they have all of those different sources of bamboo at the proper time.
We also have a question from NMD if they undergo menstruation once a year.
So menstruation is different in pandas and a number of animals. Like, they don't menstruate the way humans do. I know what you're saying, like the shedding of the lining. Pandas, a few weeks before they go into their breeding week, they do leak like bloody like fluid, and that's part of their body gearing up for this. I don't actually know how the shedding week works with the panda. My guess is it's not, right? Like if they're only ovulating once a year, they wouldn't need to shed their lining multiple times. But I will say the shedding process, like the menstruation process, is very different than like how it is for human beings. Like I said, they're now listed as vulnerable, which isn't a great place to be, but it's a lot better than where they were. So their population numbers are growing. They're not massive. The wild population is still under 2,000. But it's considered to be genetically diverse, and they seem to be self-sustaining and growing on their own without a whole bunch of human intervention. Like, there haven't been large-scale reintroductions of pandas. So the natural population is doing well now that poaching is being really well monitored and the habitat is being protected. But here's where it gets fun. China, like many other places in the world, like the United States, at one point did not think highly of their top predators, right? So in the United States, wolves, no thank you. We just wiped them out, right? And what happened? Bad things happen to the ecosystem when you take down the top predator. All sorts of other populations kind of go wonky because they used to be kept in check by the top predators, the really big animals that would run around and eat all of the deer and all of these things. They would keep the deer population, for instance, from growing out of control. And everybody, all of the scientists across the world are aware of this phenomena. And it's one of the many reasons that in the United States, we've been reintroducing wolf populations to places like Yellowstone in hope of reestablishing sort of a equilibrium of the ecosystem. Well, the same issue is true in China. And no, they don't have the gray wolf, but they had 2 top predators, both of which are almost completely gone from the area. So the panda's habitat is preserved insofar as protected from human encroachment. But there are grazers, so there are boars and there are takins that are doing some damage to the bamboo plants and some of the other key ecosystem infrastructure that the pandas rely on. And so that is a point of ongoing research and a little bit of concern. So it might not be humans, it might be the other animals, right? Because if the ecosystem is preserved and there's no top predators, all of the animals in the ecosystems should thrive, right? So that includes the boars and the takins. Their population levels are not being maintained, again, because there are not these top predators. And so there are some actually pretty concerning signs in regards to boar activity, especially. So that's sort of evolving research. And there's supposed to be a pretty big study coming out about that, I think, in the upcoming months. I might drop an update when that paper comes out.
That's a cool thing. I never thought about, like, the other species are also, like, their predators aren't there, so they're destroying the bamboo, which then further circulates to being worse for the pandas.
Yeah, and if you're thinking, well, we don't want big predators there because they're going to take out the pandas. Listen, no top predators messing with a panda. I've been told they don't mess. Pandas don't play. Pandas don't have natural predators other than humans. So even the big natural predators that were present in the ecosystem did not hunt the pandas. Now, there might be a lot of other reasons why it might not be appropriate to reintroduce the top predators that had been there. We'll see what some of the studies say. But it's a pretty serious problem now for the panda, and I just, when do we stop being the problem, chat? When do we stop being the problem? I don't know.